So I got to thinking about the last video and how I sort of was talking about the barriers to entry to becoming a dungeon master and how it can be sort of intimidating to start running your own campaign. And often, if you're the first in your group of friends to suggest playing Dungeons and Dragons, you inevitably end up becoming the person who is running the game, and how it can feel kind of daunting. And rightfully so. There's a lot that goes into running a game and making it fun for players, fun for yourself. It's more than just a game. It's managing expectations. It's project management. There's just a whole other series of levels that comes to running a game. And I started thinking as well that maybe some of the people showing up to this video have never run a game before, or are players, or are thinking about running a game, or any of the above, or none of the above. And so I thought I would talk about maybe some of the things, some of the fears that people run into, some of the anxiety-inducing terrors that come with the territory of being a DM or a GM, a game master. And I actually looked up some, things on the internet. There's plenty of blogs and subreddits and forums and all these things where people have talked about, voiced their own concerns as players becoming dungeon masters, or people just jumping into tabletop role-playing games. Things that have, maybe been hindrances to them, maybe fears that have kept them from starting to run a game like maybe they've wanted to. And I thought I would talk about those as well. I've actually got a list of things here, some of the top concerns that I saw from these different places, different blogs and stuff like that. Anyway, firstly, what was appealing to me as a DM to getting started, was ultimately creating a world of my own. As I've said before, I think if I had more time, I would probably be a writer. I love creating things. I do. And I find it a bit easier, as I've said before, I'm a musician. I find it easier to create music than maybe to plan out an entire story or novel or whatever. But this satiates that part of me, that it is a way that I get my writing fix while still, not necessarily having to dive so heavily into it that I burn out on it or anything like that. If that makes sense, I don't know. And world building was really appealing to me. Creating, a world, a map, cities that have their own architectural style, or own accents, or languages, entire things like that. All of that was really appealing to me. And for most people, I think that probably is the same thing. It's also a lot of work, which a lot of people have addressed. That's part of their fear, is that being a dungeon master is just too much work. And to that, I would say it is a lot. It's a lot of responsibility. It's more than just the game as well. And you have to realize that a lot of the things that maybe you value, the lore and the pantheon that you want to create, or the continents you want to explore, the architecture, anything like that, may not necessarily be what everybody else is naturally gravitating towards. There are things that I've written in the lore of my own campaign that people still haven't discovered yet, just because it hasn't come up yet. And it's nice to have that, but at the same time, you have to be able to curb your expectations and recognize that it's one part of the game. It's not everything. And at the end of the day, it's about everyone having fun. Now, you still have to have fun as a dungeon master, absolutely. But you also have to be able to read the room and make sure that they're having a good time. And that comes down to being able to read the players at the table and understanding that this player loves combat. This player loves storytelling. This one loves to role play. This one loves interesting, crazy old shopkeepers, and being able to read people in that sort of way. So to the fear of it being too much work, I would say it's a lot of fun work, but you need to learn how to work smarter, not harder. So maybe only writing portions of the lore that's completely necessary to, the story at the moment, rather than trying to, entirely Tolkienize your entire world. You don't have to hire George R.R. Martin to, make sure that your lore checks out and everything. Just write enough that is valuable to the current part of the story that you're telling. So that's the first one. That's the way I would address that. Another fear that came up was the fear of a lackluster game. And let's be real honest, your first few games are not going to be perfect. And to be frank, they're probably never going to be. You're always going to have something that you were like, self-criticism sort of kicks in and tells you, oh, well, that wasn't good enough. That wasn't fun. And, I think a lot of, these wonderful GMs that are out there on YouTube and other places that are just sort of, we're inundated with, it can be really easy to compare yourselves to them at the beginning. The Christopher Perkinses and Matt Colvilles, Matt Mercers, the Satine Phoenixes, Abrias, all these wonderful GMs that have had, years and years of experience. It's easy for you to feel bummed because you're not exactly like them from the beginning. And I can tell you that the first thing they would ever tell you is not to compare your style to their style. You have to develop your own thing. You have to read your own people. And it's all about adapting to that sort of situation and all that. But the fear of a lackluster game is something you definitely, I totally relate to it. And at the same time, you just have to be comfortable with your uncomfortableness. It's not going to be perfect. Your first few sessions, there's always going to be something, that doesn't go as planned. And you just have to be comfortable with that, have to be confident with, making mistakes. And it really kind of comes down to, picking your team, as you would in a D&D game, picking the right party to play with as well. Making sure that the people around your table mesh with your style. That's where a session 0, as they call it, would come in as well. Typically a session 0, for those that don't know, is where you set the expectations for your game. You talk about your style. You talk about sort of what to expect, the boundaries that you set at the table. When we started, I made sure that everyone around my table knew that arguments took place in game, not around the table. We don't fight and bring that outside of the game. And again, I've been fortunate. I know I'm lucky in that I have a group of people that play extremely well together. And at the same time, wow, a loud ass truck just went down the road and completely blew my train of thought. I apologize. He's still going. He's still going. All right, I think we're good. But yeah, I've been fortunate to have a group of people that really mesh well, not only with my style, but with each other. That's not to say that we don't have moments, and just because it's called a session 0 doesn't mean you can't have multiples of them. I've been running the same campaign since 2019, and fairly regularly, and so these guys know how to play off of each other, and they know how I run a game and all that. And we've still had other session 0s where I was like, hey, we're going to change things up a bit, we're going to do this. And it just comes down to being a decent person, I think. At the end of the day, being able to manage a group's expectations, not necessarily manage people, but of course, in a way, you are sort of herding cats the entire time. That's also the job of a DM, is making sure that you that everyone is heard, making sure that everyone is having fun, reading the entire room, and making sure that at the same time you're having fun. But the fear of a lackluster game, it's going to happen. There's going to be lulls in each moment, but I guarantee you are your worst critic 9 times out of 10. Concerns about humiliation, that was something else that came up, I'm going to make a fool of myself. And on some level, being a DM is a very expressive sort of outlet. You're bearing your soul to these people around the table, whether they know it or not, or whether you know it or not. You're telling a story and expressing ideas and themes that are very personal to you, and inevitably it will happen. You can't in my opinion, unless you're just pulling straight from other source content, when you start to write your own adventures and stories and create villains and that sort of thing, inevitably a little bit of you, I think, will be in it. And I think it's really cool to kind of look back at those and be sort of introspective and recognize that. I think it's really interesting from a storytelling perspective and as a creative outlet to recognize where these sort of themes, these central themes you come up with, where do they come from? And so you are, putting yourself out there. Again, it comes to having a good group of people around you. And it also comes to committing to the bit. I was afraid of role-playing at the beginning, coming up with voices. And you don't have to be a voice actor to make an interesting NPC. You just got to commit to it. And I'm telling you, if you take yourself a little bit less seriously, don't take yourself so damn seriously. I seriously don't. If you take yourself less seriously and have fun with the characters, and again, whatever it is, make it a bold choice. Just like with acting and art and all this stuff, whatever you do, just make it a bold decision and commit to it. I guarantee you will have fun, and the people around your table will have fun as well. And so, again, as I said before, it kind of comes down to being comfortable with your uncomfortableness. I know that's not a word. I stand corrected. That is actually a word. I looked it up. Uncomfortableness. So being comfortable with your uncomfortableness. I'm uncomfortable with that word, for instance, but I'm comfortable enough with it, with saying it, that I will repeat it once more. Uncomfortableness. What the hell is the matter with me? We're coming up on the end of the video, and I actually have some other things to talk about, and really I could ramble about a lot of these things for a lot longer than that, probably. I may hit on them in the future and talk about them a bit more. But suffice it to say that when it comes to choosing whether or not to become a DM, you stand to gain so much more than you stand to lose, if you ask me. I think that there's so many more valuable things that I have gained from being a dungeon master, a game master, whatever you want to call it. I've learned so much more about myself than I ever thought I would have from something like this, especially, a silly little nerdy game of Dungeons and Dragons. But you really do learn how to micromanage and how to plan something fun, how to make sure that their schedules line up, and being able to read people, being able to think on your toes and being improvisational, and to recognize what makes a game fun, what makes a story interesting, what makes D&D so damned magical. There's so much more to gain from it, outside of the realm of fantasy or whatever else you're running. There's so much more to gain from it than there is to lose, if you ask me. I know I sound sappy and nerdy when I talk about this, but it really is. It can be a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's a collaborative storytelling effort. And where else can you get this kind of thing? I think we live at a wonderful time that this sort of thing has sort of become as mainstream as it has. And so at the end of the day, it's about you, and it's about the people sitting around the table with you and having a good time. And just don't forget that part of it. Don't forget that at the end of the day, these are your friends, and that that should be the most important thing. Having a good time and sharing some laughs and making some memorable moments. And I promise you, if you keep those things in mind, among other things, of course, it's a lifelong process. There's so much to learn about being a DM and Dungeons and Dragons and just everything involved with that. But if you do that, I promise you will walk away with a good experience. It's not something to fear. I understand where the fear comes from, but absolutely, you have nothing to worry about. And I encourage you, if you're even on the fence, if you're even just sitting there thinking, maybe I should get into Dungeons and Dragons, you should. You absolutely should. So that's it. Look at that map. I didn't talk about this map once in this video, but there you go. Pretty happy with how that turned out. I think I'm getting better at this. Go figure. you play with this software long enough, you do get better at it. Just like dungeon mastering. Boom! We've come full circle. There we go. All right, I'm pumped. Woo! Sorry. Until next time.